I was driving home a little drunk in the back seat of a cab. Next to me sat my drunken husband, and sleeping, of course. On Michael's birthday, my husband was drunk as usual. I sat there all pissed off, but glad the night was finally over. I'm gonna put him on the living room couch and go to bed. We pulled up in front of the driveway. A cool summer breeze blew across my body as I opened the door on my husband's side and started to pull him out. But I didn't realize that my 115-pound weight couldn't lift my large husband, even though he was small. "Can I help you?" I heard it. A huge guy twice my height was coming up behind me. "Yes, please." I barely squeezed out of myself and took a couple steps to the side. The guy pulled my husband out, but he was having a hard time, so I took my husband's other arm. We barely made it to the elevator and leaned him against the wall. We were both breathing hard. "He's heavy," the guy said, with a smile on his face. I remembered that he lived one floor down. His name was John, I think. He, like his father, was a 2-meter tall and very wide closet. He'd say hello sometimes, but I didn't know his family. I just smiled back. We drove on in silence, but John was looking at me very keenly. We had a hard time getting Michael into the living room, and just as we put him down on the couch, he threw up all over John. I ran out to get a bucket and a rag and started wiping. The lights were on in the hallway and in the living room, and I could see John's shadow standing in the doorway, probably watching while I'm on all fours mopping the floor. I look very appetizing on all fours, and my husband doesn't appreciate it. At least let this guy appreciate it. Finally, I'm done mopping. John was in the bathroom trying to wipe off my husband's footprints, and I was going to the bathroom to flush the toilet. "Take off your shirt, I'll wash it." And now I put a basin and a bottle of water on my husband. When I got back to John, he was washing his shirt in the sink. When he saw me, he turned the water off and turned around. That's when my eyes fell to his stomach, specifically his 6-pack abs. It was clearly visible that he was working out at the gym. I've often looked at the abs of men and girls. I'd even say I'm attracted to it. "It's going to smell. Let's wash it with soap and water," I said, to pull myself together and take my eyes off his abs. I turned on the hot water and washed my shirt in the tub while he stood in the doorway. He was probably staring at me, and I was uncomfortable with his presence. I should wash and give him my husband's shirt and send him home. He can pick up his own tomorrow. It's a sinful thing to do, I thought, as I stood at the sink. I was getting unbearably hot, whether it was the hot water or the alcohol in my blood or the presence of a man with a beautiful body. Finally I finished and threw the shirt in the dryer to dry. "There we go. I can give you my husband's shirt. You can have this one tomorrow." My gaze kept drifting down to his abdomen, and John, standing in the tub with a slight smile on his face, was not in a hurry to answer, just looking at my body. But what's there to look at? Not a lot of breasts, except for the waist. I don't know, let me think, and started scratching the back of my head. While he was thinking, I started to look at his abs. All 6 of them were so nice and regular. Even his belly button seemed right. We stood like that for a minute. Then suddenly out of my mouth came the words, "Can I touch it?" I wanted to close my mouth and fall under the ground. It was so embarrassing. But John took my hand and put it on his. What a pleasure it was to move up and down along the cubes. To feel that skin, those hollows between the cubes. Suddenly the idea of touching with cold hands came to my mind. And supporting my hands under cold water, and then wiping them off, I again touched John and his body. At that moment, I felt goosebumps running down his body. I looked at his face and we smiled at each other. John showed determination, and while I stood there in a stupor he took my hand and pulled it down. I raised my head sharply and looked up at John. I tried to pull my hand out, but it just kept going down. God, what am I doing? I pulled my hand out, but John grabbed it. Please, his face was like the face of a dog that had done something at home. All right, but just because of the cubes, I did something that even my husband I'd never done to my husband. John's face was blissful and helpless. Close the door in case he hears, I whispered softly. John took a step and closed the door. I saw his delight. And I wondered, did he really like me? Outwardly, I didn't consider myself the first beauty. After the sin I had committed, I shoved my husband's t-shirt in his hand and escorted him out. The whole time he had a stupid smile on his face. As I looked around the house for signs and checked on my husband, I wondered why he was going to blackmail me. I was pretty sure Michael would be a little hurt, a little scandalized, but forgiving. Love at first sight? I don't think. He seems mature enough to lose his head to a woman. Even in bed, I realized I was a little foolish. How I could have done that, but I didn't kill myself. It was what it was. After all, the next day was spent as a nurse. My husband kept asking for water or headache pills. I even had to go to the drugstore. Michael wanted a hangover beer, but he wasn't home, so I went to the store. I picked up some wine for the evening. When I got home, I ran into John. He said he'd come back later for a t-shirt. He had this stupid smile on his face. After dinner, my husband felt better and we watched the show while drinking wine and beer and eating pizza. There was no desire to cook. It was getting late in the evening when there was a knock at the door. I think it was John. I went to open the door. To my surprise, there stood a friend of my husband's, whose name was also Michael. My husband was surprised to see him too. He had some beer with him, and we moved into the kitchen. Michael, the husband's friend, was a very funny guy. He told all sorts of stories, from fishing, from hunting, adventures during business trips and so on. When he came over, I laughed heartily at the top of my voice. My husband was sometimes jealous. Toward 8 p.m., John came over. After hearing about his help last night, my husband invited him to the table and poured beer. John didn't drink much, but his husband and his friend. But he and his friend kept him involved in the conversation, and after 5 or 10 minutes of awkwardness he joined in. I got hot and went to take off my robe and put on a t-shirt and shorts. While I was changing, my husband came in and after changing and went out, a mutual friend was having a birthday party to which they had been invited. They'd both conveniently forgotten, and another guest called to remind them that the cab was waiting. I closed the door and sat down in the kitchen and poured myself some wine. Just as I was about to take a sip, the bathroom door opened and John came out with a smile on his face. And after he washed his hands, he sat down next to me and looked at my body in silence. I gave him a little time to enjoy it, and then I got up and went into the bathroom. I took his washed t-shirt and headed to the bedroom to iron it. I'll iron it and then you can go. He still had a smile on his face. He seemed happy just to look at me. And deep down, I thought he was a little crazy for smiling so much. John went into the bathroom, took off his shirt and came into the bedroom. He sat down on the bed and then lay down. What a soft bed you have. I smirked and continued to look at his body. I wonder how often he goes to the gym. Or does he work out at home? I couldn't help but wonder. Finally, the iron warmed up and I started ironing John's shirt. Almost immediately he got up and stood next to me. He still had a smile on his face. I smiled back, stared at his abs, and continued ironing his shirt almost blindly. Suddenly he took my hand and put it on his, and I stroked it absent-mindedly. We met eyes and smiled, turned the shirt over, After he turned it over, I forgot myself. It felt so nice and smooth, just like a baby's skin, not a hair out of place. I don't know how long it lasted, but I came back when John took the iron from my hands and turned it off with his other hand. I unknowingly did the same thing I did yesterday. John pulled me up and we sat on the bed to make it more comfortable. I didn't know why, but I enjoyed what I was doing. When it was over, we were lying there looking at each other. Suddenly he smiled, looking into my eyes, and I laughed wildly. While I laughed with all my heart and body, I wanted to kiss him, to feel his still wet lips. Hesitated briefly, I kissed him. I'm still not sure if it was cheating or not.